He found in the schoolteacher who arrived to teach the children what the rugged Montana wilderness had tried to hide for 8 long years: the capacity to feel his heart beat for another person again. Can you imagine living with an empty chest for so long, merely fulfilling obligations while life passes by like a cold wind through a large, silent house? But this story of true love happened in the rural heartland of the American West in December 1948, when the turn of the year brought more than just fireworks and empty promises. Before we continue this emotional story, leave a comment below telling me where you are watching from right now. Write your city and state. I love knowing who is following this incredible journey of love and new beginnings. And if you enjoy true stories of overcoming odds and emotions that touch the heart, don't forget to like this video. It really helps the channel continue bringing these stories to you. Now, let's get into this beautiful story. Leonard Allister was 47 years old when Cecilia Forrester first stepped onto the soil of the Whispering Pines Ranch. He didn't know on that morning of December 9th that his life was about to change completely. He couldn't imagine that this 24-year-old woman with deep brown eyes and hands that were delicate yet firm would bring back something he had buried along with Clara, his wife, 8 years prior. The ranch was located 12 miles from the town of Highland Springs, in the heart of the Montana mountains, where the air was thin and the mornings dawned covered in a thick mist. It was 450 acres of fertile land, with timberlines climbing the hills in organized rows, pastures for dairy cattle, fields of corn and wheat, and the main house sitting atop the primary hill, surrounded by 43 ancient pine trees that gave the place its name. Leonard had inherited all of this from his father, Anthony Allister, who passed away in 1935, and had transformed the property into one of the most prosperous in the region. But financial prosperity did not fill the void of a silent house. Since Clara died on March 23, 1940, trying to give birth to the son who also didn't survive, Leonard lived as a shadow of himself. He woke before the sun rose, drank the strong black coffee prepared by Teresa, the housekeeper, dressed in his work clothes, and spent the entire day riding among the ranch hands, supervising the herds, mending fences, solving problems. He returned only when it was night, ate dinner in silence at a large table that could seat 12 people but held only one plate, and went up to the room where he didn't sleep well, the same room where Clara had died, the same bed he had never shared with anyone else since. Teresa Higgins, who had worked at the ranch for 30 years and had helped raise Leonard since he was 17, said the boss was dying little by little on the inside. She saw in his eyes the complete absence of light, that distant look of someone who merely fulfills a routine without feeling pleasure in anything. Leonard didn't smile, didn't talk beyond what was strictly necessary, didn't go to town socials, didn't receive social visits. He had transformed into a living ghost who commanded a thriving property but had no life. The ranch hands respected Leonard deeply. He was a fair boss who paid on time, provided good housing for the families, allowed for small personal garden plots, and never raised his voice or punished unjustly. But he also didn't get close to anyone affectionately. He maintained a respectful, cordial, yet impassable distance. It was as if there were a glass wall separating him from the rest of humanity. The idea of hiring a teacher for the ranch hand's children came from Sebastian Rogers, the ranch's oldest worker, a 38-year-old man with 4 children who were growing up illiterate. Sebastian approached Leonard in August of 1948, hat in hand, with characteristic humility but also admirable courage. "Boss," he said, looking at the packed dirt floor, "I have an important request to make." Leonard was mounted on his chestnut horse, returning from inspecting the timber. "What request, Sebastian?" he asked without dismounting. The ranch hand explained that he had 4 children, the oldest 10, the youngest 5, and none of them knew how to read their own names. He said there was a school in town, but it was too far for small children to walk every day, especially in winter when the snow drifts made the roads impassable. He mentioned that the other families had the same difficulty, totaling 19 school-aged children on the ranch. "Boss," Sebastian continued, his voice steady despite his nervousness, "you could hire a teacher to teach our kids right here. There's that old bunkhouse near the grain silo that could be turned into a schoolroom. We'll clean and fix it up ourselves. It would be a blessing for our families." Leonard listened in silence, the reins loose in his calloused hands. He thought for a long minute, his gaze fixed on the blue-hued mountains in the distance. Then he nodded briefly. "I'll arrange it," was all he said, and nudged the horse forward, leaving Sebastian with a look of incredulous joy. That was the first decision in years that Leonard made thinking beyond the mere administration of the property. Something in that request had stirred him unexpectedly, perhaps the image of children growing up without opportunity, perhaps a distant memory of when Clara spoke of having children and educating them well. Teresa was the one who took charge of finding the teacher. She had a cousin in Denver who knew an orphan girl, well-educated, who had studied at a convent school and had a teaching certificate, but was unemployed due to an unfairly tarnished reputation. The cousin told the whole story. Cecilia Forrester had been engaged to Oliver Sampson, a merchant from a traditional family, but 3 months before the wedding scheduled for April 1948, he had publicly broken the engagement, claiming she was not a woman of virtue. The accusation was a cruel lie, based on poisonous gossip spread by a jealous woman, but the damage was done. In the narrow-minded society of Denver, Cecilia had become persona non grata, unable to find work, shunned by the families that once welcomed her. Teresa presented the situation to Leonard directly. "The girl is a good teacher, has a fine education, needs an opportunity, and we need someone for the children," she explained while serving dinner on a cold September night. "She has no family, so she can live here on the ranch. There's the room in the east wing that's been closed for years. I'll fix everything up." Leonard ate slowly, chewing his roast beef without haste. "How much salary does she want?" he asked. Teresa named a fair amount, neither high nor low. Leonard nodded. "Send for her," he said simply, and that was how Cecilia Forrester ended up at Whispering Pines Ranch on that morning of December 9th, 1948, arriving in a buggy driven by Sebastian, who had picked her up at the nearest train station. She brought 2 worn leather suitcases, a small trunk of books, and the expression of someone who had nothing left to lose, but still held onto a stubborn spark of hope. Leonard was at the corral when she arrived. He heard the sound of the buggy coming up the dirt road, the trot of the horses echoing in the crisp morning air. He didn't go to meet her. He let Teresa handle everything, as he always did with domestic matters. He continued examining a cow that had a hoof problem, focused on his work, deliberately ignoring the arrival of the new teacher. But Teresa insisted on introducing them at lunchtime. "Miss Cecilia, this is Mr. Leonard Allister, the owner of the ranch," the housekeeper said with deliberate formality, trying to create a respectful atmosphere. "Mr. Leonard, this is the teacher, Cecilia Forrester, who will take care of the children's education." Leonard looked up from his plate for the first time, and what he saw left him momentarily stunned. Cecilia was beautiful, that was undeniable, but it wasn't a vulgar or flashy beauty. She had a delicate face with balanced features, pale skin slightly flushed by the morning cold, dark brown hair pulled back in a low bun that revealed a slender neck. Her eyes were the most striking feature, deep brown, slightly almond-shaped, with an expression of sharp intelligence and wounded but unbroken dignity. She wore a simple dress of dark fabric, nothing extravagant, but it was impeccably clean and well-pressed. She had an upright posture, hands crossed in front of her body, and looked directly at Leonard without lowering her eyes, but also without insolence. It was a look of equality, of a person who knows her own worth despite difficult circumstances. "Welcome to the ranch," Leonard said, standing up out of basic politeness, his voice coming out huskier than he intended. "I hope you feel comfortable here." Cecilia gave a slight nod. "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Alistair," she replied with a soft but firm voice, well articulated, revealing a refined education. "I will do my best to teach the children with dedication." There was a brief silence, charged with something undefinable, until Teresa interrupted by offering food. Leonard returned to work right after lunch, but throughout the afternoon found himself thinking about the new teacher in a way that bothered him. It wasn't physical attraction, at least not just that. It was something more unsettling, the way she had looked at him, without flattery or fear, just with the quiet serenity of someone who had survived storms and was still standing. There was strength in those brown eyes, and also a poorly disguised sadness that he recognized because he saw the same in the mirror every day. Cecilia spent the first few days organizing the makeshift school in the bunkhouse that the hands had cleaned and renovated with touching enthusiasm. Sebastian and the other men repaired the roof that had leaks, whitewashed the walls, darkened by mold, built rustic but sturdy benches, installed shelves for books. The women sewed simple curtains for the windows, swept the wooden floor until every bit of accumulated dust was gone, placed jars with winter berries and pine branches to brighten the room. When Cecilia saw everything ready, on December 12th, her eyes filled with tears she tried to hide by turning her face quickly. Classes began on December 15th. 19 children between 5 and 12 years old arrived clean and combed, in patched but dignified clothes, carrying palpable enthusiasm. Cecilia organized them by age and skill level, discovered that none knew how to read, beyond perhaps recognizing their own initial, and started from the absolute beginning with infinite patience. She taught vowels using songs the children repeated in an animated chorus. She drew large letters on the makeshift blackboard made of wood painted black. She told stories that held the attention of even the most restless ones. Leonard watched from afar, not deliberately, or at least he didn't admit to himself it was intentional. It just so happened that he was riding past the bunkhouse during class hours. It happened that he stopped to check the nearby fence exactly when he heard Cecilia's voice teaching, melodious and clear, carrying over the distance. It happened that he found excuses to go to the grain silo, which was a few yards from the school, just to hear the sound of the children reciting the alphabet in unison. The first direct contact between them, beyond the formal introduction, occurred on December 18th. Leonard was returning from the north pasture when he saw Cecilia walking alone along the road, carrying a stack of notebooks he had ordered from town. The cold afternoon wind whipped her dress against her legs, and she held her loose hair with one hand while balancing the notebooks with the other. Leonard approached naturally, slowing his horse to a trot. "Need some help?" he asked bluntly. Cecilia stopped, looked up, shielding her eyes from the low sun shining between white clouds. "I would be grateful, Mr. Alistair," she replied sincerely. "The notebooks are heavier than they looked." Leonard dismounted in a fluid motion, took the notebooks from her, and tied them to the saddle with a rope. Then he looked at Cecilia, assessing the situation. "I can give you a lift to the school," he offered. She hesitated for only a second before nodding affirmatively. Leonard mounted first, then extended his hand to help her. When Cecilia's fingers touched his, both felt an unexpected electric shock that neither commented on. She climbed onto the back of the horse with surprising grace, sitting sideways as was appropriate for a decent lady, and held lightly onto his waist to maintain balance. Leonard felt the warmth of those hands through his thick work shirt, felt the gentle weight of her body behind his, and something inside his chest tightened painfully and yet strangely well. They rode in silence for the 500 yards that separated them from the school. But it was a different silence, charged with acute mutual awareness. Leonard felt every breath Cecilia took, every small adjustment of position she made. Cecilia, in turn, was intensely conscious of his physical strength, the way he controlled the horse with natural firmness, the smell of sun, pine, and work that emanated from his clothes. When they arrived at the school, Leonard dismounted and helped her down, holding her by the waist for a brief moment that seemed to stretch longer than necessary. "Thank you, Mr. Alistair," Cecilia said, looking directly at him, her cheeks slightly flushed, which could be from the cold or something else. Leonard just nodded, untied the notebooks, and handed them to her. "How are the children doing?" he asked suddenly, surprising himself with the question. Cecilia smiled for the first time since arriving at the ranch, and that smile completely transformed her face, lighting it from the inside out. "They are wonderful," she replied with genuine enthusiasm. "They learn fast, are dedicated, ask smart questions. It is a joy to teach children like this." Leonard found himself smiling back, slightly, just curving one corner of his mouth, but it was a true smile, the first in years. "That's good," he said simply. Then he mounted and rode away without looking back, but feeling her eyes following him until he disappeared around the bend in the road. That night, for the first time in 8 years, Leonard couldn't sleep for a reason other than the usual. Instead of insomnia caused by guilt and emptiness, he lay awake thinking of deep brown eyes, a smile that transformed a delicate face, a touch of hands that had lasted seconds but continued burning his skin like a persistent ember. He tried to push the thoughts away, angry with himself. He had no right to feel this. Clara hadn't been dead long enough. 8 years was nothing. He had made a silent promise never to love another woman. But the heart, Leonard discovered that interminable night, did not obey rational promises. Cecilia didn't sleep well either. Lying in the comfortable bed in the East Wing room, listening to the wind making the pine trees sing outside, she pressed her hands against her chest, trying to calm her heart that beat fast from that unexpected ride. It was madness to feel anything for Leonard Alistair. He was the boss, she the employee. He was 47, she 24. He was a widower, clearly still grieving, she a girl with a stained reputation trying to rebuild her life. There was no possible future there. But when she closed her eyes, she saw his face lit by that minimal smile, felt again the warmth of his waist under her hands, and something inside her blossomed stubbornly, despite all contrary logic. The following days brought a subtle but noticeable change in the dynamic between them. Leonard began to appear at the school more frequently, always with a ready excuse. He came to check if they needed more supplies, came to ask about the children's performance, came to fix the door that squeaked, came to bring firewood for the iron stove that heated the room. Cecilia perceived the excuses for what they were, but didn't comment. Instead, she received him with polite courtesy that barely hid the pleasure of seeing him. On December 20th, Leonard appeared in the late afternoon carrying a wooden box. The children had already gone home, and Cecilia was cleaning the blackboard when she heard footsteps at the door. She turned and found Leonard standing in the entrance, tall and solid against the golden light of sunset, holding the box with an almost shy expression that seemed out of place on that imposing man. "I brought books," he said bluntly. "They were my mother's. She liked to read. I thought they might be useful for the lessons." Cecilia wiped her hands on her apron and approached, eyes shining with genuine interest. "May I see?" she asked softly. Leonard placed the box on the makeshift table and opened it. Inside were at least 20 leather-bound volumes, some with spines worn from use, others practically new. Cecilia picked up the first book with reverence, opening it slowly as one handles a precious treasure. It was a copy of Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, with a handwritten dedication on the first page that read, To Mariana, who loves words as much as I do, with love, Joseph. Cecilia ran her fingers over the delicate handwriting, feeling an inexplicable connection with that woman she had never met, but who clearly valued literature as much as she did. Your mother had excellent taste, Cecilia commented with an emotional voice. These books are treasures. Leonard watched her, seeing the way she handled the volumes with loving care, how her eyes scanned the pages with a hunger for reading, how she smiled upon discovering favorite titles. My mother said books were friends that never betrayed you, Leonard said suddenly, surprising himself with the personal revelation. She died when I was 20. She left this whole library, but I was never much for reading. Clara sometimes borrowed some, but after she was gone, the books stayed packed away. Cecilia raised her eyes to him, and in that moment there was a deep understanding between them, a silent communication of two wounded souls recognizing pain in one another. I will take care of them with all my heart, she promised softly, and I will read to the children. They deserve to know these wonderful worlds. Leonard nodded, his throat strangely tight. He stood there, uncertain if he should go or stay, until Cecilia made the decision for both. Would you like some coffee, Mr. Alistair? She asked, pointing to the stove where she always kept a hot pot for the cold days. Leonard knew he should refuse, knew he was crossing an invisible but important line. Even so, he heard himself saying yes, he would like that. Cecilia poured 2 cups of steaming black coffee into tin mugs, and they sat on the rustic benches the ranch hands had built, side by side, looking out the window at the sunset painting the mountains in shades of orange and purple. They talked. For the first time, they truly talked, not just polite exchanges between boss and employee, but a genuine dialogue between two people. Cecilia told him about her childhood in an orphanage run by nuns, about how she discovered a love for books in the small library that was her refuge. She told him about her studies to become a teacher, about the dreams she had of one day opening her own school. She didn't mention the broken engagement, and Leonard didn't ask, respecting her silence on an obviously painful subject. Leonard, in turn, spoke about the ranch, about how his father had raised him with firmness, but also justice, teaching him that land was more than property, it was responsibility. He spoke about the seasons, about how December was a time of preparation for the heavy snows of January that would nurture the spring grass. He spoke about the tenants, about how he admired the dignity of those families who worked hard and raised children with solid values despite the difficulties. He didn't mention Clara directly, but Cecilia felt the presence of the dead wife in his pauses, in the moments when his gaze grew distant, as if seeing something she couldn't see. When the sun finally disappeared behind the mountains and the night chill began to truly bite, Leonard stood up reluctantly. I need to go, he said with a husky voice. Cecilia stood up too, standing closer to him than she realized. Thank you for the books, she said, looking up because he was much taller. And thank you for the conversation. It's been a long time since I talked like this with anyone. Leonard looked at her, and what Cecilia saw in those steel blue eyes made her hold her breath. It was desire, yes, but it was also confusion, fear, guilt, and something deeper she couldn't name. Me neither, he admitted softly. Then, in a movement that seemed to surprise both equally, Leonard raised his hand and lightly touched her face, just grazing his calloused fingers against the soft skin of her cheek. It was a touch that lasted only seconds before he pulled away abruptly, murmuring a quick good night and exiting the door as if fleeing something dangerous. Cecilia stood in the middle of the empty schoolhouse, hand pressed against the cheek where he had touched, heart beating so strong she could hear it in the silence of the night. That touch had been more intimate than any kiss Oliver had ever given her. It had been the touch of a man fighting against what he felt, of a man who wanted more but was afraid to let himself want. And she, God help her, wanted him to touch more, wanted to explore that connection blossoming between them with frightening force. The next morning, December 21st, Leonard didn't appear at the school, nor the next day. Cecilia tried not to care, tried to focus on the lessons which now included reading the precious books he had brought. The children were fascinated with the stories, and she threw herself into work with an intensity that tried, unsuccessfully, to fill the void left by his absence. Teresa mentioned casually during dinner on the 22nd that the boss had gone into town to attend to business and would return only the next day. Cecilia just nodded, feigning indifference that fooled no one, least of all the perceptive housekeeper who observed everything with experienced eyes and a hopeful heart. Leonard returned on December 23rd at dusk, and when Cecilia saw him dismounting his horse in the main house courtyard, something inside her settled. She was on the balcony of her room in the east wing, a place with a prime view of the ranch's central yard. She watched him talk to Sebastian, saw the way he gestured, explaining something, saw when he looked briefly in the direction of the building where she was. Even from a distance, even with the weak twilight, their gazes met, and neither looked away for long seconds that felt like eternity. That night, Teresa knocked on Cecilia's door, carrying a dinner tray. "Mr. Leonard sent word that tomorrow, Christmas Eve, there will be a celebration here at the ranch," informed the housekeeper with a discreet smile. "He asked for everyone to come, tenants and their families, and you too, teacher. There will be supper, music, the children will present something they are preparing." Cecilia felt her heart accelerate. "I would be honored to participate," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Teresa left the tray and turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "That man hasn't smiled in 8 years," the housekeeper commented without looking back. "Since you arrived, I've seen him smile 3 times. Think about that." And she left, leaving Cecilia with burning cheeks and a mind in turmoil. Christmas Eve dawned with a clear blue sky and a bright sun reflecting off the snow, contrasting with the bitter cold that would come at night. The ranch was in a frantic preparation movement since early morning. The women cooked traditional dishes in their home kitchens and in the main house's large kitchen. The men set up long tables in the barn, cleaned and decorated for the occasion, hung colorful bunting from the rafters, and prepared a massive bonfire outside to warm the night. The children ran back and forth, excited about the party and the presentation they had rehearsed in secret with Cecilia. Leonard coordinated everything personally, and the tenants commented among themselves, amazed that they hadn't seen the boss so involved in a social event since before Mrs. Clara's death. He was different, carefully shaved, dark hair with grey strands at the temples freshly cut, wearing a clean shirt of fine fabric that Teresa had ironed with care. There was even a different light in his eyes, a certain anxiety that had nothing to do with party preparations and everything to do with a certain teacher with deep brown eyes. Cecilia spent the day helping the women and rehearsing with the children for the last time. She had chosen simple poems they had memorized and planned a small play telling the story of the Nativity so that even the youngest could participate. The children were nervous but excited, and she helped each one memorize their lines, adjusted the improvised clothes that would serve as costumes, combed hair with a maternal affection that sprang naturally from her. When the sun began to set and the party started, Whispering Pines Ranch seemed transformed. The lanterns hung in the barn created points of golden light dancing in the draft. The bonfire crackled outside, sending sparks into the sky that was beginning to fill with stars. The tables were laden with food, roast beef, turkey with gravy, mashed potatoes, green beans, cornbread, stuffing salads, pumpkin pies, and apple cobbler. There was wine Leonard had ordered specially, and fresh cider for the children. But when Cecilia came down from the main house to join the party, Leonard forgot everything else. She was beautiful in a simple but devastating way. She wore a deep blue dress that highlighted her eyes, with a modest neckline and appropriate long sleeves. Nothing extravagant, but fitting her slender body perfectly. Her hair was loose for the first time since arriving at the ranch, brown waves cascading down her back, pinned only at the sides. She had a light touch of color on her lips, and her pale skin glowed under the lantern light. But it was the smile that truly transformed her, a genuine smile of joy as she greeted the families who had welcomed her so well. Leonard found himself moving automatically toward her, drawn like a moth to a flame. "Good evening, teacher," he said when he got close, his voice lower and more intimate than he intended. "You look beautiful." Cecilia raised her eyes to him, surprised and visibly touched by the direct compliment. "Thank you, Mr. Alistair," she replied softly. "The party is wonderful. Everyone is so happy." Leonard looked around, seeing the gathered families, the children playing, adults talking and laughing, and felt something expand inside his chest. "It's been a while," he murmured more to himself than to her. "It's been a long time." They ate together, not seated right next to each other because that would be improper, but at the same long table where Leonard sat at one end and Cecilia a few seats down, but with a direct line of sight that allowed frequent exchanges of glances. Every time their eyes met, there was an invisible electric current connecting them, sparking in the winter air. Sebastian, sitting next to Leonard, noticed and smiled discreetly at his wife Rosa, who had also noticed and returned the smile with a hopeful expression. After supper came the children's presentation. They climbed onto a makeshift platform, nervous but brave, and recited the poems Cecilia had taught them. It was beautiful to see those children of ranch workers, who 3 weeks prior didn't know the alphabet, now declaiming verses with clarity and visible pride. Some stumbled on words, others spoke too quietly, but all tried with touching seriousness. And when they finished the simple but sincere play about the birth of Jesus, there was enthusiastic applause from all the adults present, many with tears in their eyes, seeing the impossible progress that teacher had achieved in such a short time. Cecilia was radiant, eyes shining with pride and emotion. Leonard couldn't take his eyes off her. He saw when she hugged each child, congratulating them for the effort, saw the genuine tenderness with which she treated each one, saw the dedicated teacher, but also saw the woman who would be an extraordinary mother someday. And that thought, instead of bringing the usual pain of remembering the son who died before being born, brought something different, a sudden and overwhelming desire for a future, for possibility, for maybe. When the music started, first shyly with Sebastian's fiddle playing reasonably well, then more animated as others joined with improvised instruments, couples began to dance. Leonard stood still, watching, until Teresa appeared beside him with a determined expression. "Are you going to stand there like a fence post, or are you going to ask the teacher to dance?" the housekeeper asked bluntly. Leonard looked at her, startled. "I don't know if it would be appropriate," he murmured. Teresa huffed impatiently. "Leonard Alistair, I raised you since you were a boy and never saw you afraid of anything, but now you're shaking in your boots over a girl who clearly likes you as much as you like her. Go and live a little. Your wife wouldn't want you dead while you're still alive. She would want you to be happy." Teresa's words hit Leonard like a punch to the gut. He looked at Cecilia, who was sitting alone near the bonfire, watching the couples dance with an expression between melancholic and happy, and made a decision. He walked to her with firm steps, despite the nervousness he hadn't felt even on the day he asked Clara to marry him decades ago. He stopped in front of her and extended his hand. "Would you like to dance, teacher?" he asked simply. Cecilia looked at the extended hand, then at his face, and saw vulnerability there that disarmed her completely. "It would be an honor, Mr. Alistair," she replied, placing her small, warm hand in his large, rough one. They danced, and the moment Leonard pulled her gently close, one hand holding hers and the other resting respectfully but firmly on her waist. The moment Cecilia placed her free hand on his shoulder and lifted her face to meet his eyes shining intensely in the firelight, both knew something had irrevocably changed between them. It wasn't just attraction anymore, it was the beginning of true love, frightening and wonderful in equal measure. They danced to a slow song played on the fiddle, moving in a simple but sincere rhythm, and the rest of the world seemed to disappear. There was no more boss and employee, no more widower and girl with a stained reputation. There was just Leonard and Cecilia, just two lonely hearts finding a way to each other through the darkness of their painful pasts. And when the music ended and they should have separated, they stood still for seconds too long, hands still intertwined, gazes locked on one another, until voices and laughter around brought them back to reality. Leonard let her go reluctantly, murmured a husky thank you, and moved away quickly, before doing something reckless, like kissing her right there in front of everyone. Cecilia stood still, hand still raised in the air, as if she could still feel his warmth, heart beating so hard she feared she might faint. In that moment, under the stars of the Montana winter, on Christmas Eve of 1948, she finally admitted to herself what she had been denying for days. She was in love with Leonard Allister, completely and irrevocably in love, and there was no turning back. Christmas dawned differently at Whispering Pines Ranch. There was something in the air, a subtle but perceptible change that everyone felt, but few dared to comment on. Leonard woke before dawn as always, but for the first time in 8 years, he didn't feel the crushing weight of loneliness when he opened his eyes. He thought of Cecilia immediately, of the way she had danced in his arms the night before, of the warmth of her body against his, of the brown eyes looking at him with tenderness he didn't deserve, but desperately desired. He got up and prepared himself with unusual care, shaving slowly, choosing a clean shirt, wetting his hair to tame the rebellious strands. Teresa observed everything from the kitchen when he came down for coffee, and smiled discreetly while serving the hot biscuits with butter that he barely touched because his stomach was tight with nervous anticipation. Cecilia had also woken early, but couldn't get up immediately. She lay watching the weak light of dawn enter through the window, hand pressed against her chest where her heart still beat fast with memories of the previous night. She relived every second of the dance, every look, every touch. She knew she was getting into a dangerous situation, that opening her heart again after Oliver's betrayal was an immense risk, especially for a man carrying so much grief. But she couldn't help it. Leonard awakened something in her that went beyond physical attraction. It was a deep soul recognition, a feeling of finally finding the place where she belonged. They met on the porch of the main house at 7 in the morning, Leonard heading out to work and Cecilia going to check the school before the day's festivities. They stopped upon seeing each other, the 10-foot distance between them seemingly impassable, yet also insufficient. "Good morning," Leonard said, his morning voice husky. "Good morning," Cecilia replied softly. There was a charged pause where both searched for appropriate words. "About last night," began Leonard hesitantly, but Cecilia interrupted gently. "It was beautiful," she said sincerely. "Thank you for asking me to dance." Leonard looked at her intensely. "The pleasure was mine," he stated with a low but firm voice. "I hope we can repeat it soon." The words hung in the cold morning air like a promise. Cecilia felt heat rise to her cheeks and nodded briefly before looking away, intimidated by his intensity. Leonard forced himself to head to the stables, but turned twice on the way to look at her, and both times found her watching him too. It was a game of glances that spoke more than 1,000 words. Christmas Day was quiet at the ranch. It was Sunday, and most of the ranch hands rested, taking the opportunity to spend time with their families. Leonard tried to keep himself busy with non-urgent tasks, but found himself constantly looking for excuses to pass near the main house where he knew Cecilia was. He saw her on the porch in the morning, reading one of the books he had brought, the sun shining on her loose hair. He saw her helping Teresa prepare lunch, the two chatting animatedly in the kitchen. He saw her walking alone through the gardens in the afternoon, arms crossed against the cold, a thoughtful expression as she watched the distant mountains. It was at that moment that Leonard made a decision. He approached her without announcing himself, his steps making a slight crunch on the snow-dusted ground beneath the pines. Cecilia turned upon hearing him, and the smile that lit up her face when she saw him dissolved any hesitation he still had. "Would you like to join me for a ride?" he asked directly. "I want to show you something." Cecilia accepted without hesitation. Leonard prepared 2 horses, one for him and a gentle mare for Cecilia, who admitted she rode only reasonably well. He helped her mount, hands firm on her waist for a moment that lasted longer than necessary, and then mounted his own horse. They rode side by side along the trail that climbed the main hill, Leonard pointing out property landmarks, while Cecilia listened with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions about the ranch's operation. They rode for 40 minutes until they reached the top of the highest ridge on the property, a point from which one could see the entire ranch spread out below like a living map. And beyond it, the other properties, the distant town, the blue mountains forming an infinite horizon. It was a breathtaking view. Cecilia dismounted with Leonard's help and walked to the edge, eyes wide with admiration. "It's beautiful," she whispered reverently. "I've never seen anything like it." Leonard stood beside her, not looking at the landscape but looking at her. "My father brought me here when I was 10, he recounted. "He said this was the heart of the ranch, the place where you could see everything and understand the responsibility we carried. I come here when I need to think, when things get too heavy." Cecilia turned to him, hearing the poorly disguised emotion in his voice. "And is it heavy now?" she asked softly. Leonard looked at her for a long moment before answering. "It was heavy for 8 years, he admitted finally. Every day was just survival, just fulfilling obligations without feeling anything. But since you arrived, something changed. I can't stop thinking about you, Cecilia. I can't stop looking for excuses to be near you. And that scares me because I don't know if I have the right to feel this, if I'm not betraying Clara's memory, if you even want something like this from an old, bitter man like me." The words came out in a torrent, a confession he clearly hadn't planned but could no longer hold back. Cecilia felt tears burn her eyes. "You are not old nor bitter," she said with a voice trembling with emotion. "You are a good man who suffered a terrible loss and still kept standing, taking care of everyone around you. And as for me," she took a deep breath, gathering courage, "I can't stop thinking about you either. Since that ride on the horse, since the day you brought the books, since we danced yesterday, you make me feel seen, valued, not just for being young or pretty, but for who I really am." Leonard took a step toward her, closing the distance between them. "And who are you really?" he asked softly. Cecilia held his gaze without wavering. "I am a woman who was judged unfairly, who had her heart broken, who almost gave up believing in true love. But you are making me believe again, Leonard. You are showing me that men of honor exist, men who see beyond the surface." The way she said his name, without the formal Mr. Alistair, with intimacy and tenderness, broke the last barrier inside him. Leonard raised his hand and touched her face, this time without pulling away quickly. He caressed her cheek with his thumb, watching how she closed her eyes at the touch, how she leaned slightly against his palm. "Cecilia," he murmured, voice husky with emotion, "may I kiss you?" The respectful question, asking permission instead of simply taking, touched Cecilia deeply. She opened her eyes and met his, seeing desire mixed with tenderness, passion mixed with fear of hurting her. "Please," she whispered, and then Leonard leaned in and kissed her. It was a slow, reverent, exploratory kiss, lips touching softly first, then with more pressure as both relaxed into the sensation. Leonard held her face with both hands, as if she were something precious that might break. Cecilia leaned into him, hands moving up to his shoulders, fingers gripping the fabric of his coat. The kiss deepened gradually, becoming more urgent, more necessary, as if years of loneliness on both sides met and finally found relief. When they finally separated, both were breathless. Leonard rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed, breathing fast. "God," he whispered, "I didn't know I was still capable of feeling this." Cecilia hugged him around the waist, pressing her face against his chest, hearing his heart beating strong. "Me neither," she admitted, "but I'm happy we're feeling it together." They stayed like that for long minutes, just holding each other on top of the mountain, the cold wind blowing around them, but neither feeling it, because the warmth they shared was enough. When they finally returned to the horses and began the descent, something fundamental had changed between them. They were no longer boss and employee. They were Leonard and Cecilia, man and woman who had found in each other the possibility of a new beginning, of true love healing old wounds. In the following days, between Christmas and New Year's Eve, they found ways to be together whenever possible. Leonard appeared at the school during lessons, sat discreetly in the back, and watched Cecilia teach, admiring her patience and dedication. Cecilia accepted invitations to ride with him at dusk, exploring different parts of the ranch while talking about everything: dreams, fears, childhood memories, hopes for the future. Every conversation brought them closer, revealing layers of personality and history that made them fall even more deeply in love. At night, after everyone slept, sometimes they met on the porch of the main house, talking in low voices so as not to wake anyone, sitting close, but not so close as to be improper should anyone see them. Leonard finally told her about Clara, about how they met when he was 25 and she 20, about the 15 years of marriage that were good but not passionate in the way he now understood true passion to be. He had loved Clara deeply, but it was a quiet, comfortable love, without the sweeping intensity he felt for Cecilia. The guilt he carried, he admitted on a particularly cold night of December 28th, wasn't just for her death, but for wondering if she would have survived if he had insisted on taking her to a hospital in the city instead of trusting the local midwife. It was the guilt of a decision he would never know was right or wrong. Cecilia held his hand firmly while listening, and after he finished, told her own story in more detail. She spoke about Oliver, about how he courted her for months, seeming sincere, about the engagement that filled her with hopes of a stable future. But 3 months before the wedding, he broke everything off publicly in front of Denver society, claiming her reputation was stained. The accusation was totally false, based on a cruel rumor spread by a jealous woman who wanted Oliver for her own daughter. But the damage was done. No one believed her. Even the nuns at the orphanage where she grew up looked at her with suspicion. Cecilia became a social pariah overnight, and Oliver married another woman 3 months later, proving the breakup was never about honor, but convenience. Leonard was furious hearing the story. "How dared he said with a voice tense with anger. "How does someone dare destroy an innocent woman's reputation like that? If I ever meet him, I'll have very harsh words for that coward." His protective fury touched Cecilia deeply. No one had ever defended her like that. No one had cared enough to get angry on her behalf. "Thank you," she whispered with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for believing in me." Leonard pulled her into his arms, kissing the top of her head. "I will always believe in you," he promised. "Always." But not everything was perfect. On December 29th, an unexpected visitor arrived at the ranch. Arthur Montgomery, a neighboring rancher who owned a smaller but prosperous property 5 miles away, arrived riding an expensive thoroughbred, dressed in elegant imported riding clothes, displaying wealth with an ostentation Leonard always despised. The two men had known each other since childhood but were never friends. Arthur had been in love with Clara before she chose Leonard, and although he never admitted it openly, everyone knew he harbored resentment all these years. If you are enjoying this emotional story of true love, leave a like on this video. It helps me a lot to continue bringing these heart-touching stories. Arthur had spent the last 6 years in San Francisco, handling business and trying to erase the humiliation of being rejected. He had returned just 2 weeks prior, just in time for the New Year festivities, bringing with him an air of superiority and a calculating look that made Leonard immediately uncomfortable. "Leonard, old friend," Arthur greeted with false cordiality as he dismounted in the main house courtyard. "I heard you're throwing parties again. Came to see if it's true and secure my invite for New Year's Eve." Leonard shook the extended hand with only polite firmness. "Arthur," he replied with a neutral voice, "welcome back. The party is open to neighbors, of course." Arthur smiled, but the smile didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. "Excellent. I also heard interesting rumors about a new schoolteacher you hired for the hands. They say she's young and pretty. That's admirable generosity on your part, Leonard, looking after the workers' education and giving an opportunity to a girl with no family." There was veiled criticism in the words, an insinuation Leonard chose to ignore. "Cecilia is an excellent teacher," he said with a firm voice. "The children are learning quickly." It was at that moment that Cecilia came out of the schoolhouse, accompanied by 3 children carrying books. She was laughing at something one of them had said, head tilted back, hair shining under the strong midday winter sun. She was absolutely radiant, and when she saw Leonard in the yard, her face lit up even more with an intimate smile that was just for him. But then she realized he wasn't alone, and the smile diminished slightly, becoming more cautious. Arthur followed Leonard's gaze and saw Cecilia for the first time. His expression changed instantly, eyes narrowing with a predatory interest Leonard recognized and despised immediately. "So that's the teacher," Arthur said softly, but with a tone that made Leonard tense. "She really is very beautiful. You've always had luck with beautiful women, haven't you, Leonard? First Clara, now this girl, though this one is too young for you, don't you think? Maybe she needs the company of a man closer to her age." The words were said casually, but the threat was clear. Arthur was marking territory, signaling interest in Cecilia in a way that challenged Leonard to react. Leonard felt anger rise in his chest, but forced himself to remain calm. "Cecilia is a teacher and respected by everyone here," he said with a low but dangerously controlled voice. "I suggest you treat her with the same courtesy." Arthur laughed lightly. Of course. Just innocent admiration, my dear fellow. May I meet her?" Leonard wanted to refuse, wanted to send Arthur away immediately, but had no adequate social justification to do so. So he nodded rigidly and walked with Arthur to where Cecilia waited with the children. "Teacher Cecilia," Leonard said formally, "this is Arthur Montgomery, a neighboring rancher. Arthur, the teacher Cecilia Forrester." Cecilia extended her hand politely, and Arthur took it, but instead of simply shaking it, he kissed the back of it with exaggerated gallantry that made her uncomfortable. "Enchanted, teacher," he said with a sugary voice. "It is a rare pleasure to find such a beautiful young lady in such a remote region." Cecilia withdrew her hand delicately but firmly. "Mr. Montgomery," she greeted with cool courtesy. "Excuse me, I need to get back with the children." And she walked away quickly, feeling Arthur's eyes following her in a way that made her want to take a bath. Leonard also saw the look and felt a violent urge to punch that smug smile off Arthur's face. But he controlled himself, bidding the neighbor farewell with polite coldness and promising to see him at the New Year's party. When Arthur finally left, Leonard went to find Cecilia. He found her in the schoolroom, standing near the window with a disturbed expression. He entered without knocking, and she turned quickly. "Is everything all right?" Leonard asked, approaching. Cecilia hesitated, then nodded. "I just found him a little intense," she admitted. "The way he looked at me made me uncomfortable." Leonard felt the anger return. "Arthur is a complicated man," he explained. "He was in love with Clara years ago. She rejected him and chose me. He never completely got over it. Now he's back from the city with money and arrogance, and I fear he sees you as a way to finally have something I have." Cecilia looked at him with wide eyes. "Something you have," she repeated slowly. "Are we a we then, Leonard?" The direct question caught him off guard, but he didn't hesitate in his answer. "I want us to be," he said with intensity. "I know it's fast. I know we've barely known each other 3 weeks, but Cecilia, I've never felt like this in my life. I want you to be mine, not as property but as a partner, as the woman I love. Yes," he finally admitted the word he had been avoiding, "I love you. And I know it's crazy to declare this so soon, but it's true." Cecilia felt tears roll down her cheeks. "I love you too," she whispered. "I also thought it was crazy. Tried to deny it to myself. But it's impossible. I love you, Leonard. Completely." He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides, and kissed her with passion that stole the breath from both. When they separated, he held her face between his hands. "Then be mine officially," he asked. "Marry me, Cecilia. Be my wife." Cecilia held her breath, shocked by the sudden proposal. "Leonard, it's very fast," she protested weakly. "People will talk, will judge. The age difference, my past, all this will cause a scandal." Leonard shook his head firmly. "I don't care what people will say," he declared. "I spent 8 years dead inside, caring only about obligations and appearances. Now that I've found a reason to live again, I won't waste a single day for fear of others' judgment. I want you by my side, Cecilia. I want to sleep every night with you in my arms and wake up every morning seeing your face. I want to have children with you, build a future with you. Marry me." The passionate declaration dissolved all her objections. "Yes," whispered Cecilia. "Yes, I will marry you." Leonard kissed her again, this time with explosive joy that made him laugh against her lips, a sound she had never heard before but was absolutely beautiful. They stayed embraced for long minutes, just feeling the reality of the commitment they had just made. But Leonard wanted to do things right. On December 30th, the eve of New Year's Eve, he went to the family safe in the main house office and opened the velvet box he hadn't touched in decades. Inside was an emerald ring that had belonged to his paternal grandmother, a family heirloom passed down through generations. It was a delicate but elegant ring, with an oval emerald surrounded by small diamonds, set in yellow gold, aged by time but still shiny. Leonard cleaned it carefully, polishing the metal until it gleamed, and put it in his pocket. He waited until late afternoon, when the sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and went to find Cecilia. She was on the balcony of her room, as she often was at that hour, watching the sunset. Leonard climbed the stairs silently and stopped behind her. "Cecilia," he called softly. She turned and smiled, but the smile wavered when she saw his serious expression. "What is it?" she asked worriedly. Leonard took her hand and fell to one knee, right there on the balcony, with no witnesses other than the pine trees and the distant mountains. Cecilia brought her free hand to her mouth, tears already forming in her eyes. "Cecilia Forrester," Leonard said with a deep voice charged with emotion, "you brought light back to my life when I thought I would live in darkness forever. You made me remember what it is to smile, what it is to have hope, what it is to truly love. I love you more than I thought possible to love someone. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, of building a life with me, of letting me spend the rest of my days making you happy?" He opened the small velvet box, revealing the emerald ring sparkling under the golden twilight. Cecilia sobbed, nodding vigorously because words failed her. "Yes," she managed to say finally. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Leonard stood up, took her trembling hand, and slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her with infinite tenderness as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, blessing their commitment with its final light. Teresa found out about the engagement that same night when she saw the ring on Cecilia's hand during dinner. The housekeeper squealed with joy, hugged both with surprising strength for a woman of her age, and declared that was the best Christmas and New Year gift she could receive. "Thank God," she repeated with tears in her eyes. "Thank God this stubborn man finally found happiness again, and what a perfect woman for him, Miss Cecilia. You were made for each other." Leonard decided to announce the engagement officially during the New Year's party. He wanted everyone to know, wanted to proclaim to the world that Cecilia would be his wife, wanted to make it clear, especially to Arthur Montgomery, that she was spoken for and completely out of reach. Cecilia was nervous about the idea of public exposure, but Leonard held her hand firmly and promised he would stand by her side, facing any judgment together. Preparations for the New Year's Eve party began on the morning of December 31st, with even greater fervor than Christmas preparations. This would be a bigger party, with neighbors from nearby ranches invited in addition to the Hands and their families. Leonard wanted it to be a memorable night, not just for marking the new year of 1949, but for marking the beginning of his new life with Cecilia. The women cooked all day, preparing a sumptuous banquet. The men decorated the yard with even more lanterns and bunting, built a small stage for music, organized long tables covered with white cloths. Children ran around, helping with small tasks, all excited about the prospect of staying up until midnight to see the turn of the year. Cecilia spent the day helping where she could, but also preparing herself for the night. Teresa lent her a dress that had belonged to Clara, a gesture the housekeeper made with explicit blessing. "Mrs. Clara would have adored you," Teresa said sincerely. "She would want Leonard to be happy, and she would want this dress to be worn by a woman he loves." The dress was of dark green silk, a color that matched perfectly with the emerald ring, with a modest but elegant neckline and a skirt that flowed gracefully. Cecilia tried it on, and it fit perfectly, as if made for her. When night fell and guests began to arrive, Whispering Pines Ranch was transformed into a fairy tale setting. Hundreds of lanterns created galaxies of light among the trees. The central bonfire crackled, sending sparks into the starry sky. Music played lively, a mix of fiddle, guitar, and accordion. The smell of delicious food permeated the cold night air. Leonard waited for Cecilia at the entrance of the main house, dressed in his best dark suit, impeccable white shirt, hair combed with care. When she came down the stairs, he forgot to breathe. She was absolutely stunning, the green dress highlighting her brown eyes, hair partially pinned up with loose curls framing her face, the emerald ring shining on her hand. "You look beautiful," he said hoarsely when she got close. Cecilia smiled shyly. "You look very handsome too," she replied. Leonard offered his arm, and she rested her hand on it. Together they walked to the party, as a couple for the first time publicly. The looks they received were varied, some of warm approval, others of curiosity, a few of poorly disguised disapproval. But Leonard held his head high and kept Cecilia by his side, and that was all that mattered. The party went wonderfully in the first few hours. People ate, drank, danced, laughed. Leonard and Cecilia danced several songs, always close, always aware of each other in a way that was obvious to any observer. Sebastian and Rosa approved clearly, smiling at the couple every time they passed. Teresa was radiant, circulating among guests, making sure everyone was well served. But then Arthur Montgomery arrived. He came accompanied by two friends from the city, elegant and slightly arrogant men, who looked at the rural party with barely hidden disdain. Arthur was impeccably dressed in an expensive suit, blonde hair shining with pomade, thin moustache perfectly trimmed. His eyes searched and found Cecilia immediately, and the smile that curved his lips was predatory. Leonard felt Cecilia tense beside him when Arthur approached. "Leonard," the neighbour greeted with false cordiality. "Wonderful party, and teacher Cecilia," he added, turning to her with exaggerated reverence. "What an enchanting vision! That dress highlights your natural beauty spectacularly." Cecilia thanked him politely but coldly, moving subtly closer to Leonard. Arthur noticed the movement and also noticed the ring on her hand. His eyes narrowed briefly before recovering the casual expression. "What a beautiful ring," he commented, taking Cecilia's hand before she could withdraw it. "Looks like an antique jewel. Is it a gift from the boss for the excellent education you're giving the children?" There was poison in the words, a clear insinuation of impropriety. Leonard took a step forward, placing himself partially between Arthur and Cecilia. "It is an engagement ring," he said with a firm voice, loud enough for nearby people to hear. "Cecilia accepted my marriage proposal. She will be my wife." Silence spread like waves from them, conversations stopping as the news was processed and shared. Arthur's face contorted briefly in an expression of anger before he forced a smile. "My congratulations," he said with a hard voice. "What a quick romance. Barely 3 weeks of acquaintance and already engaged. Must be true love indeed. Or perhaps," he added, turning to Cecilia with a cruel look, "perhaps it's a smart young woman who knows how to recognize an opportunity when she sees one. After all, what better way to ensure a comfortable future than marrying a rich, lonely widower?" The insult hung in the air like poison. Cecilia paled as if she had been slapped. Leonard felt anger explode inside him with a force he hadn't felt in years. He took a step toward Arthur, fists clenched, but Cecilia held his arm firmly. "No," she whispered, "it's not worth it." But Leonard couldn't let that pass. His words came out low but charged with controlled fury. "You know nothing about Cecilia, Arthur. You don't know about her character, about her kindness, about everything she overcame. She is not an opportunist. She is an extraordinary woman whom I am immeasurably lucky to have by my side. And if you cannot recognize that, if your bitterness and envy blind you so much, then I suggest you leave my property immediately." Arthur laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "Bitterness," he repeated. "Interesting coming from a man who spent 8 years grieving until a young, pretty teacher appeared. Does everyone here know her true story, Leonard? Do they know she arrived here because she was ruined in Denver? That she had an engagement broken for moral issues? Perhaps you should investigate better in whom you are placing your trust and your name." This time it was Cecilia who spoke. Her voice was firm, despite the tears shining in her eyes. "It is true that I had a broken engagement," she said clearly so everyone could hear. "My ex-fiancé spread lies about me to justify his cowardice. I came here with nothing but my education and the desire to start over. And here I found not just work, but a community that welcomed me, children who respect me, and a man who truly loves me without conditions or judgments. I am not ashamed of my story, Mr. Montgomery. I am ashamed only of men like you who try to destroy others out of pure malice." The dignity with which Cecilia spoke, the way she faced the accusations without bowing, deeply touched everyone present. It was Sebastian who took the next step. The ranch hand had witnessed the whole scene and now approached with a serious expression. "Mr. Montgomery," he said with respect but firmness, "Teacher Cecilia has been a blessing to our families. She taught our children with dedication, treated everyone with kindness, was never anything but exemplary. You have no right to come here and insult her like that." other hands murmured agreement. Rosa, Sebastian's wife, approached and put an arm around Cecilia's shoulders in a gesture of support and protection. More women joined her, forming a silent but powerful circle of solidarity. The entire community was choosing its side, and it wasn't Arthur's. The neighboring rancher saw he had lost. He looked around at the hostile faces, at Leonard who stared at him with barely contained hatred, at Cecilia holding her head high despite the tears. "Very well," he said with a hard voice. "I see I've made my opinion clear. Enjoy the party." And he withdrew with his friends, mounting horses and leaving in a cloud of dust. The silence that followed his departure was broken by Leonard. He turned to face all the guests, holding Cecilia's hand firmly in his. "Since everyone heard the announcement in a less than ideal way, let me do it formally," he said with a clear and proud voice. "Cecilia Forrester has accepted to be my wife. We will marry as soon as possible, and I hope all of you will bless and support us. She is an extraordinary woman, and I am the luckiest man in the world that she loves me." There was a beat of silence, and then Teresa started clapping. Sebastian joined her, then Rosa, and then everyone was applauding and shouting congratulations, well wishes filling the night. Cecilia cried openly now, but they were tears of joy and relief. Leonard pulled her into his arms and kissed her right there in front of everyone, sealing the commitment publicly in a way that left no doubts. The party continued after that, with renewed energy. It seemed the confrontation with Arthur had purified the air, allowing everyone to celebrate genuinely. Leonard and Cecilia danced, song after song, lost in each other, laughing and whispering promises of the future. When midnight approached, everyone gathered in the central yard, counting down the final seconds of 1948. 10, 9, 8, they shouted in unison, the excitement palpable. 7, 6, 5. Leonard pulled Cecilia closer, looking into her eyes with love that left her breathless. 4, 3, 2, 1, Happy New Year. And then he kissed her while fireworks exploded in the sky above them, while music played and people shouted and laughed, while the new year of 1949 began full of promises and hope. It was a kiss of celebration, of commitment, of true love, finally found after so much suffering. When they separated, both were smiling through happy tears. "Happy New Year, my future wife," whispered Leonard. "Happy New Year, my future husband," replied Cecilia. They stood embraced under the stars, surrounded by a community that supported them, while the future stretched bright and promising before them. It was a perfect new beginning, proof that true love existed, that second chances were possible, that broken hearts could be healed when they found the right person. And on that night, in the first minute of 1949, at Whispering Pines Ranch, two hearts finally found their home in each other. The first days of January 1949 brought significant changes to Whispering Pines Ranch. The news of Leonard and Cecilia's engagement spread quickly through the region, generating varied reactions. In the town of Highland Springs, tongues wagged ceaselessly. Some celebrated the union as a beautiful story of renewal and true love. Others, especially those influenced by Arthur Montgomery, murmured criticisms about the age difference and the speed of the relationship. But inside the ranch, where people really knew both of them, there was only genuine joy. The children were especially enthusiastic when Cecilia told them she would continue teaching even after becoming Mrs. Allister. They hugged her tight, saying she was the best teacher in the whole world. The ranch hands, who had witnessed Leonard's transformation from living ghost to man in love, silently thanked God for finally sending someone capable of bringing life back to the boss they respected so much. Leonard dove into wedding preparations with surprising determination. He wanted everything to be perfect for Cecilia, wanted her to have the dream wedding that the coward Oliver had stolen from her. He consulted Teresa on every detail, from renovating the ranch chapel that had been abandoned for years to the menu for the party that would happen after the ceremony. The chapel was a small stone building erected by Leonard's grandfather in 1880, situated at the highest point of the property, surrounded by yellow cottonwood trees. It held about 50 people, had rustic dark wood pews, a simple but dignified altar, and 3 colored stained glass windows that projected rainbows of light when the sun hit them at the right time of day. Leonard hired carpenters to restore the time-damaged benches, painters to refresh the whitewashed walls, and gardeners to tend the paths leading up to it. Cecilia, for her part, continued dedicating herself to teaching with renewed passion. The children made remarkable progress. In just 2 months, most could read complete sentences and write their own names with neat handwriting. She introduced basic math, teaching them to count, add, and subtract using stones and seeds as visual tools. She taught them geography by drawing maps on the dirt floor of the yard, showing where Montana was in relation to other states. She told stories from history in a way that held the attention of even the youngest. But beyond teaching, Cecilia also worked to completely win the trust of the community's women. Some still looked at her with reserve, not because they believed the rumors spread by Arthur, but simply because she was very young and pretty, and there was a certain natural distrust. Cecilia understood this and responded with persistent patience and kindness. She offered to teach illiterate women to read on Friday nights after the children had class. She started with just 3 women brave enough to admit they couldn't read. In 2 weeks, there were 12. In a month, 18 women of all ages sat on the rustic school benches, practicing letters and words with fierce concentration and growing joy. Rosa, Sebastian's wife, became a close friend to Cecilia. She was a wise woman of 40, mother of 4, with a face marked by the sun and hands rough from hard work, but with a generous heart and sharp insight into people. One February afternoon, while walking together collecting medicinal herbs Rosa knew deeply, the woman asked directly, "Do you really love Boss Leonard, or are you marrying for security?" Cecilia stopped, looked into the other woman's eyes, and replied with a firm voice charged with emotion, "I love him more than I thought possible to love someone, Rosa. He looks at me as if I were the most precious person in the world, listens to me when I speak, values my opinions, makes me laugh and makes me feel safe. I am not marrying for money or position. I am marrying because I cannot imagine living without him." Rosa studied her face for a long moment, then nodded, satisfied. "I needed to hear that from your mouth," she explained. "Not because I doubted, but because I wanted to be sure you see the extraordinary man he is. Boss Leonard suffered a lot. He deserves to be loved for real, not just for convenience." Cecilia held Rosa's hand with gratitude. "I love him for real," she promised, "and I will spend the rest of my life proving that to him and to everyone." As February advanced, the relationship between Leonard and Cecilia deepened daily. They found stolen moments during the day, shared coffee on the morning porch, riding together at dusk, deep conversations under the stars. Leonard spoke of his dreams for the ranch, about how he wanted to modernize certain operations without losing the traditions that made the place special. Cecilia shared her hopes of expanding the school, perhaps eventually offering secondary education for the teenagers, creating a community library with the books Leonard kept discovering in forgotten corners of the main house. But there were also challenges. In mid-February, an unexpected letter arrived. The messenger from town handed it directly to Leonard, who recognized the Denver postmark immediately. His heart tightened reading the sender, Oliver Sampson. He opened the letter with tense fingers, read the content, and felt anger boil inside him. Oliver had written asking to speak with Cecilia, claiming he had made a terrible mistake and wanted a chance to explain, to ask for forgiveness, to perhaps win back what he had lost. He mentioned his marriage to the other woman had failed, that he was regretful, that he realized too late Cecilia was the woman he should have by his side. The letter dripped with self-pity and arrogant presumption that he would be well received. Leonard found Cecilia at the school during recess. She noticed immediately by his expression that something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked, approaching worriedly. Leonard handed her the letter without saying anything. Cecilia read it, and as she advanced through the lines, her face went from confusion to disbelief and finally to cold anger. "The audacity of him," she said with a voice trembling with contained fury. "After destroying my reputation, abandoning me publicly, marrying another woman just months later, now he thinks he can simply write a letter and all will be forgiven." She crumpled the paper in her hand. "I don't want to see him, Leonard. I don't want to hear his pathetic excuses. That chapter of my life is closed. You are my future now. Only you." The fierce declaration warmed Leonard's heart. He pulled her into his arms, kissing her forehead. "You don't have to see him," he promised, "but if he comes here, and I have a feeling he will because men like him don't accept rejection easily, I want you to be prepared. I want you to know I'll be by your side, that I won't allow him to hurt you again." Cecilia hugged him tightly. "I know," she whispered. "I know you will protect me, and I also know how to protect myself now. I am no longer the naive girl who believed in empty promises." Leonard's prediction proved correct just a week later. Oliver Sampson arrived at the ranch on a Saturday morning in late February, riding a rented horse, dressed in clothes trying to look elegant but visibly worn. He was a man of average appearance, dark hair starting to thin, a face that could have been handsome but was ruined by an expression of weakness around the mouth and eyes. He was 32, but looked older, marked by dissipation and bad choices. Leonard was in the yard when Oliver arrived, and recognized him instantly from the detailed description Cecilia had given. He felt immediate and visceral hatred for that man who had caused so much pain to the woman he loved. "You are Oliver Sampson," Leonard said, without greeting or courtesy. Oliver dismounted, trying to assume a confident posture that didn't match the nervousness in his eyes. "Yes, I am. I came to speak with Cecilia." Leonard crossed his arms over his broad chest, an intimidating posture, despite making no threatening move. "Cecilia doesn't want to talk to you," he informed with a hard voice. "I suggest you mount your horse and go back to Denver." Oliver raised his chin defensively. "With all due respect, Mr. Allister, this matter is between me and Cecilia. We have a history together. She deserves to hear what I have to say." It was at that moment that Cecilia came out of the main house. She had seen the visitor arrive from the window and came down immediately, knowing by instinct who it was. She stopped at the top of the stone stairs leading to the yard, sunlight illuminating her from behind, creating almost a halo effect. She wore a simple light blue cotton dress, hair in a braid falling over her shoulder, and her posture was that of a queen facing an unpleasant subject. Oliver turned to see her, and his face transformed into an expression of mixed desire and regret. "Cecilia," he called, taking a step toward her. "Please, I need to talk to you, need to explain, ask forgiveness. I made a terrible mistake. Let bad people influence my judgment. I should have trusted you, should have fought for us, but I can fix this now. We can start over, go somewhere else where no one knows the story, marry like we always planned." Cecilia descended the steps slowly, each step deliberate and controlled. She stopped at a safe distance from Oliver, Leonard immediately moving to stand beside her, a protective and solid presence. She looked at her ex-fiancé with eyes showing nothing but cold disdain. "You don't understand anything, Oliver," she said with a clear, firm voice. "You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. You chose to believe lies about me because it was convenient. Chose your social standing over my honor. Chose to humiliate me publicly instead of investigating the truth. and then chose to marry another woman while I dealt alone with the consequences of your false accusations. Those were deliberate choices, not mistakes." Oliver tried to interrupt, but Cecilia raised her hand, silencing him. "I haven't finished," she said with authority that surprised him. "You say you want to start over, but what do you really want? You want the naive girl I was who admired you and believed every word you said? That girl doesn't exist anymore. You destroyed her. The woman I am now has no place for you in her life. I found a man who truly values me, who trusts me, who loves me for real without conditions or judgments. I'm going to marry Leonard Allister in June, and it will be a marriage based on mutual respect and true love, everything you were never capable of giving me." Oliver looked from Cecilia to Leonard, seeing the way the tall, imposing rancher stood beside her, hand resting possessively yet affectionately on her back, seeing the emerald ring shining on her hand. He realized he had lost definitely, that there was no argument or plea that would change the situation. He tried one last desperate card. "He only wants you because you're young and pretty," Oliver said with cruelty born of desperation. "He's an old, widowed man who needs someone to warm his bed and keep his house. You are trading true love for financial security. Is that what you've become, Cecilia? A woman who sells her youth for money?" Leonard took a threatening step toward Oliver, but Cecilia held his arm firmly. "Leave it to me," she whispered. Leonard stopped, trusting her completely. Cecilia turned to Oliver with a look that could freeze fire. "You have no idea what true love is," she said with a low but cutting voice. "Leonard sees me as a complete person, not just a decorative object. He values my mind as much as anything else, encourages me to keep teaching, to pursue my dreams, to grow. He doesn't control me or diminish me. He elevates me, and as for his age, it means nothing when there is a real connection of souls. I prefer to spend my life with a mature man who loves and respects me than with an insecure boy who betrays me at the first difficulty." The words hit Oliver like physical slaps. He paled, then flushed with humiliation and anger. "Very well," he said with a hard voice. "I see you've made your choice. Hope you're happy with your decisions." He mounted the horse roughly, pulled the reins with unnecessary violence, making the animal back up nervously, and left without looking back. As soon as he disappeared down the road, Cecilia began to tremble. The adrenaline and anger that sustained her during the confrontation drained suddenly, leaving her weak. Leonard caught her in his arms immediately, holding her firmly against his chest. "You were magnificent," he murmured, kissing the top of her head. "So strong, so brave. I am so proud of you." Cecilia clung to him, finally allowing tears to fall. They weren't tears of regret or missing Oliver. They were tears of relief, of final liberation from the past that haunted her. "It's over," she whispered. "That chapter is really over now." Leonard held her tighter. "Yes," he agreed, "and our new chapter is just beginning, my love." The following months were a period of intense preparation and growing happiness. March arrived, bringing rains that refreshed the earth and made everything bloom. The cottonwood trees around the chapel exploded in bright yellow, creating a fairy tale setting. April brought more stable weather and hard work in the fields where spring planting was beginning. Leonard was extremely busy supervising the complex operation, but always found time for Cecilia, even if it was just 15 stolen minutes, to have coffee together or exchange hurried kisses behind the silo when no one was looking. May arrived with the renewed chill of mountain nights and final preparations for the wedding set for the first Saturday of June. Teresa coordinated everything like a benevolent general, making sure every detail was perfect. Cecilia's wedding dress was being sewn by a talented seamstress from town, a woman who wept with emotion while working on the simple but elegant white silk fabric that Leonard had insisted on buying from the best money could acquire. Leonard also did something that surprised Cecilia deeply. He hired a lawyer from Denver to officially investigate the rumors Oliver had spread about her. The lawyer worked discreetly but efficiently, and in 3 weeks had complete documentation proving the accusations were totally false, including a signed statement from the woman who originally spread the lies, confessing under legal pressure that she invented it all out of envy. Leonard presented these documents to Cecilia on a May night, placing the thick folder on the table between them. "This clears your name completely," he explained seriously. "I can have copies distributed in Denver, publish in local papers, ensure everyone knows the truth. Your reputation will be restored." Cecilia looked at the documents, then at Leonard, eyes filling with tears of gratitude. "You did this for me," she whispered. Leonard took her hand. "I did this because you deserve justice," he replied, "because that coward has no right to have stained your name. You are an honorable woman, and the whole world should know that." Cecilia hugged him tightly, crying on his shoulder. They were tears of relief, gratitude, love so deep it hurt physically. "Thank you," she repeated several times. "Thank you for believing in me, for fighting for me, for loving me like this." Leonard simply held her, making a silent promise to always protect her, always defend her, always love her with every breath he had. If you are moved by this story of true love, don't forget to like and share this video. The wedding day, the first Saturday of June 1949, dawned with a perfect blue sky without a single cloud, as if the universe itself conspired to bless the union. The chapel was transformed. Restored benches polished until they shone, wild flowers in improvised but charming vases on every available surface, cleaned stained glass windows projecting rainbows of light, dancing on the whitewashed walls. Father Anselm, a 65-year-old vicar who had served the region for 40 years, arrived early to prepare everything, his kind face radiant with joy at finally celebrating a happy moment in Leonard's life after so much suffering. The entire ranch participated in the celebration. Tenants and their families wore their best clothes, women in colorful dresses saved for special occasions, men in clean shirts and dark trousers, children immaculate with tamed hair and shined shoes. Neighbors from nearby ranches arrived in buggies and on horseback, bringing modest but sincere gifts, hand-embroidered towels, tea sets, patchwork quilts that took months to sew. Leonard waited at the altar dressed in a new, dark suit of excellent quality, grey vest, crisp white shirt, silk tie that Teresa had personally adjusted 3 times until perfect. His hair was freshly cut, beard carefully shaven, and in his eyes was a shine of pure happiness no one had seen in a decade. Sebastian stood beside him as witness and friend, holding the rings with reverent care. When the music started, a simple melody played on a guitar by a local musician, everyone stood and turned to the chapel entrance. And then Cecilia appeared, and Leonard forgot how to breathe. She was absolutely stunning. The white silk dress fell gracefully to her ankles. Delicate long sleeves, modest but elegant neckline, cinched waist highlighting her slender figure. A tulle veil partially covered her face, held by a simple crown of fresh white flowers. She carried a bouquet of white and yellow roses Leonard had specially ordered, but it was her face that truly stole the scene, radiant with happiness, eyes shining with tears of joy, a smile so luminous it seemed to light up the entire chapel. Teresa walked beside Cecilia, playing the role of mother the bride never had, the housekeeper crying openly with emotion. They walked slowly down the aisle between the pews, each step deliberate and significant, while everyone watched with smiles and their own tears. When they reached the altar, Teresa kissed Cecilia's cheek, whispered a silent blessing, and placed the bride's hand in Leonard's waiting one. The touch of their hands, even through the delicate gloves Cecilia wore, sent an electric current through both. Leonard looked into her eyes through the veil and saw their love so deep and true, he felt his knees almost weaken. "You look beautiful," he whispered too softly for anyone else to hear. Cecilia smiled tenderly. "You look handsome too," she whispered back. Leonard lifted her veil slowly, revealing her face completely, and for a moment they just looked at each other, aware only of one another, despite the 50 people present. Father Anselm began the ceremony with a deep voice charged with emotion. He spoke about true love, second chances, how God always had a plan even when humans couldn't see. He spoke specifically about Leonard and Cecilia, about how they were living proof that it was never too late to start over, that broken hearts could be healed, that true love transcended age, circumstances, or social judgments. When it came time for vows, Leonard held both of Cecilia's hands and spoke with a firm voice charged with emotion. "Cecilia Forrester, you entered my life when I was dead in everything but name, brought light where there was only darkness, hope where there was only despair, love where there was only emptiness. You taught me to smile again, to dream again, to live again. I promise to love you every day for the rest of my life. I promise to protect you, honor you, value you. I promise to be your partner in all things, your safe harbor in all storms, your constant love in all seasons, until death parts us, and even after, because love like ours transcends this life." Cecilia was crying openly now, tears rolling freely down her cheeks. When it was her turn, her voice came out trembling but sincere. "Leonard Alistair, you found me when I was broken and lost, gave me not just shelter, but a true home, not just work, but purpose, not just safety, but genuine love. You look at me as if I were the most precious person in the world, treat me with respect I never experienced before, love me in a way that heals all old wounds. I promise to love you with every breath I take. I promise to stand by your side in joy and sorrow, in health and sickness, in prosperity and adversity. I promise to be your companion, your confidant, your best friend, your eternal love, until death parts us. And I agree that even after, because this love is forever." Rings were exchanged with hands trembling slightly from emotion. They were simple gold bands, but engraved inside with their intertwined initials and the date. Leonard slid the ring onto Cecilia's finger with reverent care, then kissed her hand softly. Cecilia did the same, her small hands holding his large calloused hand with infinite tenderness. Father Anselm smiled with eyes shining with his own tears. "By the power vested in me," he said with resonant voice, "I declare you husband and wife. Leonard, you may kiss your bride." Leonard didn't need a second permission. He pulled Cecilia into his arms and kissed her with passion that made some older ladies fan themselves discreetly. It was a kiss of promise, of commitment, of eternal love. When they finally separated, both were laughing through tears, completely lost in the happiness of the moment. The chapel exploded in applause and cheers. Children threw flower petals they had collected for days. Adults shouted congratulations and well wishes. Music played lively as Leonard and Cecilia walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, stopped constantly for hugs and kisses on cheeks from practically everyone present. The party that followed was a magnificent celebration. Long tables set up under the pine trees bowed under the weight of food, whole roasted pig, chicken with gravy, smoked ham, herb-seasoned rice, beans, corn, fresh salads, warm homemade breads, and a whole table just for sweets, including a 3-tiered wedding cake Teresa had supervised personally. Leonard and Cecilia sat at the head table, but didn't stay seated long. Leonard constantly pulled his wife to dance, unable to stay away from her for more than a few minutes. They danced slow waltzes, lively reels, everything, always close, always looking at each other as if there was no one else in the world. During one of the rare moments they sat to eat something, Sebastian stood up to make a toast. He tapped his knife on his glass, asking for attention, and when everyone quieted, spoke with a strong but emotional voice. "I've worked for Mr. Leonard for 20 years, he said. Saw him young and full of dreams, saw him marry Mrs. Clara, saw him break when she died, saw him survive but not live for 8 long years. And then teacher Cecilia arrived, and in a matter of weeks I saw a miracle happen. Saw the boss smile again, saw light come back to his eyes, saw him become a whole man again. Miss Cecilia," his arm pointed to her with respect, "you didn't just teach our children to read, you taught our boss to live again. And for that, all our families are eternally grateful. May you have a long and happy life together, full of love, health, and many children." The toast was received with raucous enthusiasm, raised glasses, shouts of approval. Cecilia was crying again, deeply touched by the sincere words. Leonard kissed her right there in front of everyone, not caring about impropriety, just wanting to express the immense love he felt. The party continued well after dark, lanterns lighting the night, music playing, people dancing and laughing. But eventually, as the moon rose high in the starry sky, Leonard and Cecilia slipped discreetly away from the celebration. They walked hand in hand to the main house, which was silent and empty, Teresa having arranged to stay at one of the tenant families' houses to give the newlyweds privacy. Leonard carried Cecilia across the threshold, a tradition he insisted on keeping despite her laughing and protesting he would hurt himself. He didn't hurt himself. Carried her easily up the stairs to the master bedroom Teresa had prepared meticulously. New white linen sheets, lit candles creating soft romantic light, fresh flowers in vases, bottle of wine and 2 glasses on the small table. Leonard placed Cecilia gently standing beside the bed. For a moment they just looked at each other, the reality of what was about to happen, creating mixed nervousness with anticipation. Cecilia broke the silence first. "I'm nervous," she admitted honestly, cheeks blushing. Leonard caressed her face with infinite tenderness. "Me too," he confessed, "but we are together, and we will discover everything together. There is no rush, my love. We have a lifetime." And then he kissed her, slowly first, savoring but quickly deepening as passion that had been accumulating for months finally had permission to express itself completely. Cecilia responded with equal fervor, hands rising to unbutton his vest while he worked delicately on the buttons of her wedding dress. Clothes fell to the floor slowly, revelations made with reverence and mutual admiration. And when finally they united as husband and wife completely, it was with mixed tenderness and passion, murmured declarations of eternal love, tears of happiness, and absolute sensation of finally being complete. Much later, lying intertwined under the sheets, Cecilia resting her head on Leonard's chest, listening to his strong heart beating rhythmically, she whispered in the soft darkness, illuminated only by candles still burning, "Leonard, I am so happy. I never thought it would be possible to be this happy." Leonard kissed the top of her head, squeezing her closer. "Me too, my wife," he replied with voice husky with emotion. "You are my miracle, Cecilia. My second chance, my true love, my life." And she raised her face, kissed him softly and whispered, "And you are mine." The months that followed were a golden period of domestic happiness. Cecilia continued teaching the children, now as Mrs. Alistair, with even more authority and respect. Leonard, in turn, was more productive and creative in managing the ranch than he had been in years, personal happiness overflowing into all areas of his life. They renovated the east wing of the main house, transforming empty rooms into welcoming spaces. Cecilia brought a feminine touch the house hadn't had in years, new curtains, colourful cushions, fresh flowers always present, frequent music. Dinners that used to be silent, solitary meals transformed into animated conversations where husband and wife shared the day's events, laughed at funny stories, made plans for the future. Frequently, they invited tenants for community dinners at the main house, breaking traditional social barriers in a way some neighbors criticized, but which immensely strengthened the ranch community. In August, Leonard surprised Cecilia with an extraordinary gift. He had contacted a publisher in the city and ordered 50 new textbooks for the school, plus 20 works of literature. When the boxes arrived, Cecilia cried with joy, hugging him tight and calling him the most generous and wonderful man in the world. But for Leonard, it wasn't generosity, it was investment in what was important to his wife, and therefore important to him. September brought news that filled both with indescribable joy. Cecilia had noticed changes in her body for a few weeks: morning nausea, increased sensitivity, unusual tiredness. Rosa, with experience of 4 pregnancies of her own, had gently suggested perhaps it was a good idea for Cecilia to consult the town midwife. The midwife, Mrs. Francis, 70 years old, who had brought half the region's children into the world, examined Cecilia and confirmed with a wide smile she was pregnant, probably 2 months, baby expected for March 1950. Cecilia returned home floating, running to find Leonard, who was in the barn, supervising repairs. "Leonard!" she called, breathless from running. He turned, alarmed by the urgency in her voice, dropping the tool he held. "What happened?" he asked, approaching quickly. "Is everything okay?" Cecilia held both his hands, laughing and crying simultaneously. "I'm pregnant, Leonard. We're going to have a baby." For a moment, Leonard stood completely still, face white with shock. Cecilia started to worry he was reacting badly. Memories of losing Clara and the dead son, perhaps being too much. But then he exploded in joy, picking her up and spinning her, laughing loud, tears rolling down cheeks. "A baby," he repeated. "We're going to have a baby." "Oh God, Cecilia, you made me the happiest man in the world." He put her gently back on the ground, suddenly worried. "Shouldn't have done that," he said, anxious. "Could have hurt you or the baby." Cecilia laughed at his concern. "I'm pregnant, not broken," she joked, "but I appreciate the care." Leonard knelt right there on the dirt floor of the barn and kissed her belly, which still showed no sign of the life growing inside. "Hello, little one," he whispered with emotional voice. "I am your father, and I already love you more than words can express." Cecilia caressed his hair, her own heart overflowing with love for that extraordinary man. Cecilia's pregnancy was watched with obsessive care, not just by Leonard, but by the entire ranch community. Leonard insisted on taking Cecilia for doctor visits in the city, a day-long trip they made monthly. The doctor, a competent middle-aged professional, assured them Cecilia was perfectly healthy and the pregnancy progressing normally. But Leonard risked nothing. Hired Mrs. Francis to visit the ranch weekly to check on Cecilia, insisted she rest more, reduce teaching hours, carry nothing heavy. Cecilia tolerated the overprotection with patience, mixed with loving exasperation. "Leonard," she often said, "women have had babies for thousands of years while doing much harder work than what I'm doing. I'm fine." But Leonard couldn't avoid the worry, ghosts of the past haunting him despite all rationality. Cecilia understood and allowed him to care for her, touched by the depth of his love and concern. October and November passed quietly, Cecilia's belly visibly growing now, the baby kicking strong, especially at night. Leonard spent hours with his hand on her belly, feeling his son's movements, marveling at the miracle of life. They discussed names constantly. If a boy, maybe Anthony after Leonard's father, or Matthew, which Cecilia always liked. If a girl, maybe Clara, honoring the first wife, a gesture Cecilia offered generously and which touched Leonard deeply, or Beatrice, which meant she who brings happiness. December arrived, bringing double celebration, the first anniversary of their meeting since Cecilia had arrived at the ranch on December 9th, 1948. Leonard marked the date with a special dinner on the main house porch, just the two of them under the stars, reminiscing how it all started exactly 1 year ago. 1 year, Leonard marveled. Seems impossible it's been only 1 year. Feel like you've always been in my life. Cecilia, with the prominent 7-month belly now, caressed his face. Always was, she replied softly. Just took time for us to meet. But the wait was worth it. New Year's 1950 was celebrated quietly, without big party because of Cecilia's advanced pregnancy state. But at midnight, Leonard and she climbed to the top of the hill where he had taken her that first important afternoon, and watched the surrounding mountains, listening to distant sounds of festivities from other ranches. At midnight, he kissed her softly, hand resting protectively over the belly where their baby slept. "Happy New Year, my beloved wife," he said. "This year will bring our child, completing our family, will be the best year of our lives." Cecilia kissed him back, smiling through happy tears. "Happy New Year, my love. I agree completely." January and February 1950 were months of final preparation. The nursery was decorated with loving care. Wooden crib Leonard built personally with his own hands, colourful mobiles Cecilia sewed, soft curtains Teresa embroidered, piles of tiny clothes community women knitted and sewed as gifts. Leonard installed screen on the window to keep out mosquitoes, painted the wall soft yellow, neutral colour since they didn't know the baby's sex, placed comfortable rocking chair where Cecilia could breastfeed. On March 15, 1950, 2 weeks before the due date, Cecilia woke at dawn with the first contraction, squeezed the hand of Leonard, who slept beside her. "Leonard," she whispered urgently, "think it's starting." Leonard jumped from bed as if electrocuted, instantly awake and in controlled panic mode, sent hand to fetch Mrs. Francis immediately, prepared the room as the midwife had instructed, held Cecilia's hand through each contraction coming with increasing frequency. Mrs. Francis arrived in less than an hour, assessed the situation with quiet competence of decades of experience. "Everything progressing normally," she assured Leonard, who was pale with worry. "Baby in right position, heartbeat strong, will be smooth birth, you can trust me." But Leonard couldn't help remembering Clara, how everyone thought everything was fine until it wasn't. He held Cecilia's hand with almost painful strength, praying silently for it to be different this time. Labour lasted 10 hours. They were the longest hours of Leonard's life, watching Cecilia suffer through increasingly intense contractions, unable to do anything but hold her hand and murmur encouragement. Teresa was present too, wiping Cecilia's sweaty face with cool cloths, offering water, praying rosaries softly in the corner of the room. Finally, while afternoon sun entered through windows illuminating the room with golden light, Mrs. Francis announced it was time to push. Cecilia, exhausted but determined, gathered her last reserves of strength. Leonard supported her from behind, holding her, whispering he loved her, that it was almost over, that she was so strong and brave. And after 20 minutes of intense final effort, the robust cry of a baby filled the room. "It's a boy," announced Mrs. Francis with joy, lifting the baby for parents to see. A beautiful, healthy boy. Leonard couldn't see straight through tears running freely down his face. Mrs. Francis worked efficiently cleaning the baby, cutting umbilical cord, wrapping him in soft blanket, then placed him in Cecilia's arms, who cried with relief and joy. "Look, Leonard," she whispered, wondering, "our son, he is perfect." Leonard finally allowed himself to look properly, and what he saw stole his breath completely. The baby had red, wrinkled face, typical of newborn, but already had tuft of dark hair, eyes squeezed shut, tiny fists clenched. Was absolutely perfect. Perfect and alive and healthy. Leonard extended trembling finger, and baby immediately grasped it with surprising strength. That simple gesture broke Leonard completely. He sobbed, all tension and fear accumulated from last month's, finally released. "Thank you," he whispered to Cecilia. "Thank you for this gift, for being okay, for bringing our son into the world. I love you so much." Cecilia, exhausted but radiant, kissed him softly. "I love you too. And I love our son. Shall we call him Anthony, like your father?" Leonard nodded, unable to speak, emotion closing his throat. "Anthony Leonard Alistair," said Cecilia, looking at the baby. "Welcome to the world, little one. You are very loved." The following weeks were whirlwind of sleepless nights, endless diapers, frequent feedings, and absolutely indescribable joy. Anthony revealed himself relatively quiet baby, crying mainly when hungry or needing change. Had voracious appetite, nursing with enthusiasm that made Cecilia laugh, grew visibly every day, getting chubby, more alert. Leonard was completely devoted father. Got up in middle of night with Cecilia, changed diapers without complaint, rocked Anthony to sleep, singing lullabies he invented on the spot. Spent hours just watching son sleep, marveling that something so small and perfect could exist, that he and Cecilia had created this life together. Tenants visited constantly to meet the baby, bringing modest but significant gifts, hand-carved wooden toys, knitted blankets, sewn clothes. Children from Cecilia's school were especially enchanted with baby, making colorful drawings to decorate his room and promising to help teach him when he grew up. In June 1950, on Leonard and Cecilia's first wedding anniversary, they held simple but deeply meaningful celebration. Sitting on main house porch at dusk, Anthony sleeping peacefully in Cecilia's lap, Leonard held wife's free hand and spoke with voice charged with emotion. "Year and a half ago I was dead alive," he said, "just existing, fulfilling obligations, feeling nothing. And then you arrived that December morning, and everything changed. You taught me to live again, Cecilia, gave me love, hope, purpose, and now gave us our son. There are no words enough to express how much I love you, how grateful I am for you." Cecilia, with tears shining in eyes, kissed him softly. "And you saved me too, Leonard. Gave me home when I had none. Gave me true love when I thought I never would know. Gave me family. We are each other's miracle." The following years brought growing prosperity and deep happiness. Whispering Pines Ranch became known not just for cattle quality, but also for exemplary schools Cecilia directed, now with hired helper to allow her to dedicate more time to Anthony. In 1952, Cecilia gave birth to a girl they named Beatrice, completing family. In 1955, another boy, Matthew, arrived, bringing even more joy. Leonard never stopped silently thanking every day for New Year of 1948 that brought Cecilia to his life. He aged gracefully beside her, hair going completely grey, but eyes always shining with love when looking at wife. Cecilia blossomed as dedicated mother, respected teacher, and loved wife. Children grew healthy and happy, surrounded by community that adored them. Decades later, when Leonard was 73 and Cecilia 50, they returned to top of that mountain, where he took her first time and where they had kissed. Holding wrinkled hands but still firmly intertwined, looked at ranch spread below, now managed with help of adult Anthony, with Beatrice teaching in expanded school, and Matthew attending university in capital. "Worth every moment," whispered Cecilia, resting head on his shoulder. "All suffering, all pain of past. Worth it because led us to each other." Leonard kissed top of her head as always did. "Worth more than worth it, my love. You are and always will be greatest gift life gave me. True love exists, and I found in you on that magical new year." And there, under infinite blue sky of Montana, with pines singing in wind and mountains watching in silence, their love continued strong as always, proving second chances exist, that hearts can be healed, and that true love, when finally found, lasts forever. The most beautiful love story between a widowed rancher and a young teacher at New Year had become legacy of hope, eternal proof that never is too late to start over when one has courage to love again.